Hey, welcome back to English in Fluency. I'm Alex, and I'm really glad you're here today, because this lesson is one that I think can change the way you listen to English forever. Seriously. Not just improve it a little bit, but actually change it. If you've ever watched a movie in English, or listened to a podcast, or even talked to a native speaker and thought, I understood every single word, but somehow I still missed the point, then this video is for you. Stay with me until the end, because I'm going to tell you a story, a real kind of story with real people in it. And through that story, you're going to learn something that most English learners never really get taught. You're going to learn how English speakers use their voice to tell you, without saying it directly, which words really matter in a sentence. This is called emphasis or stress, and once you can hear it, understanding spoken English gets so much easier. So get comfortable. Maybe grab a coffee or tea, and let's get into it together. Let me start by asking you something. Have you ever noticed that when people speak, they don't say every word with the same importance? Some words come out strong, loud, a little slower, almost like the speaker is pushing them forward. Other words just kind of slide by, quiet and fast, almost like background music. This is not random. This is one of the most important tools that English speakers use to communicate meaning. And here's the thing. If you only focus on the words themselves and you ignore how they're said, you're going to miss a huge part of the message. Sometimes the exact same sentence can mean two completely different things, just depending on which word the speaker decides to emphasize. That's what we're exploring today, and I promise, by the time we're done, you'll start noticing this everywhere, in every English conversation you hear. Now, before I go further, let me introduce you to someone. Her name is Lena, and she's 24 years old. She just moved to a new city, a busy, loud, slightly overwhelming city, for a new job. Lena grew up speaking English at school. She studied hard. She passed her exams. She even scored well on listening tests. But when she arrived at this new job, in her very first week, something strange happened to her. She kept understanding the words people said, but she kept missing what they actually meant. And I want you to really imagine this with me, because this is going to be the heart of our lesson today. On Lena's first Monday, she walked into the office a little early, nervous, holding a coffee she barely drank because her hands were shaking slightly. Her manager, a calm but very direct woman named Priya, greeted her at the door. Priya said, "We need this report by Friday, not Monday." Simple sentence, right? Every learner at a B1 level, maybe even lower, could understand every single word in that sentence. We need this report by Friday, not Monday. Nothing complicated there. But here's the question I want you to think about. Which word do you think Priya said with the most emphasis, the most stress, the loudest and clearest sound? Take a second and guess before I tell you. If you guessed Friday, you're right, but there's more to it. Priya actually stressed two words strongly, Friday and not. She said something like, "We need this report by Friday, not Monday," with real weight on both of those words. Why does that matter so much? Because Lena, in her nervousness, only really caught the word report and the general shape of the sentence. She understood, okay, I need to prepare a report. But she completely missed the urgency, the deadline information, the contrast between Friday and Monday. In her mind, she thought she had more time. She thought maybe Monday was the deadline because that word came at the end and somehow stuck in her memory more than the meaning behind the stress. This is such a common problem, and I want you to know, if this has ever happened to you, you are not alone at all. It happens to thousands of English learners around the world every single day. They hear the words, they even understand the grammar, but they miss the emotional and practical weight of the sentence because they didn't catch which words were emphasized. And in English, unlike some other languages, emphasis is not just about being polite or dramatic. It carries real information. It can completely flip the meaning of a sentence. Let's slow down here and really break apart what emphasis, or stress, actually is in spoken English. When a speaker emphasizes a word, they usually do a few things at the same time. First, they might say the word a little louder. Second, they often stretch the vowel sound slightly, making the word a tiny bit longer than usual. Third, their pitch, meaning how high or low their voice sounds, often rises or becomes more dramatic on that word. And fourth, sometimes there's a very small pause right before or after the important word, almost like the speaker is giving your brain a second to catch it. All of these signals together are like a flashing light that says, "Hey listener, pay attention to this word specifically, because it matters more than the others around it." Let's go back to Lena for a moment, because her story continues, and it gets even more interesting. After that conversation with Priya, Lena spent the whole week working on the report, but she was relaxed about it, thinking she had until Monday. She even went out on Thursday night with her new co-worker, a friendly, easygoing guy named Marcus, who worked in the design department. Marcus was one of those people who just made everyone feel comfortable immediately. The kind of person who remembers your coffee order after meeting you once. They went to a small restaurant near the office, and Lena was telling him, quite relaxed, "Yeah, I've got until Monday to finish the report, so I'm not stressed at all." Marcus paused for a second, and you could see something shift in his face. That little look people give you when they realize you've misunderstood something important. He said gently, "Wait, Lena, I'm pretty sure Priya said Friday. She was really clear about it in the team meeting too." And in that moment, Lena felt her stomach drop. She replayed the conversation in her head, and suddenly she remembered. Yes, Priya had said Friday, with such strength in her voice, almost punching the word out. But because Lena was nervous and focused on understanding individual words rather than the emphasis pattern, she had completely missed the real deadline. Now here's what I love about this story, and why I wanted to share it with you today. This isn't really about Lena being bad at English. She wasn't. Her vocabulary was strong, her grammar was solid, she could read complicated books, and she could write clear emails. Her problem was very specific. She hadn't trained her ear to catch stress and emphasis patterns in real, natural spoken English. And that skill, unlike vocabulary or grammar, is rarely taught directly in traditional classrooms. Most textbooks focus on words and sentence structure, but they almost never explain, in a practical way, how a native speaker's voice rises and falls to show meaning. So let's use this moment, right here with Lena at the restaurant table, panicking slightly over her coffee, to teach you something you can use immediately, starting today, in your own listening practice. When you listen to English, whether it's a podcast, a YouTube video, a movie, or even a real conversation, I want you to start asking yourself this question constantly. Which word in this sentence is the speaker pushing? Which word feels heavier, stronger, more alive than the others around it? That word is almost always carrying the most important piece of information. Let's practice this together right now, using a similar sentence to the one Priya said. I want you to say this sentence out loud, right where you're sitting, even if it feels a little strange to talk to your screen. Say, "We need this report by Friday, not Monday." And this time, really push hard on the word Friday, stretch it a little, make your voice slightly louder there, and then do the same thing on the word not. Feel the difference in your mouth and your voice as you do this. This is exactly what a native English speaker does naturally, without even thinking about it, and it's exactly what you need to start listening for. Let's go even deeper into Lena's story, because the emotional side of this lesson matters just as much as the technical side. After Marcus told her about the deadline confusion, Lena didn't sleep much that night. She kept thinking about how she was going to explain this to Priya, how embarrassing it would feel to admit she had misunderstood something so basic. She even considered just staying up all night finishing the report early, before Priya noticed anything was wrong. But Marcus, being the supportive friend he quickly became, told her something that I think is really valuable, not just for this situation, but for language learning in general. He said, "Honestly, Lena, this happens to a lot of people. Even people who've spoken English their whole lives. Sometimes you're distracted, sometimes you're nervous, and you just don't catch the emphasis. The best thing you can do now isn't to panic. It's to just message Priya tonight, be honest, and ask if there's any flexibility, or at least show her you're on top of it." And Lena, even though her hands were still a little shaky, took his advice. She sent a short, polite message to Priya that night, letting her know she was finishing the final sections and would have it ready first thing Friday morning. Priya's response came back within a few minutes, calm as always. She wrote, "Perfect. That works. Thanks for the update." No drama, no frustration. Nothing like what Lena had imagined in her anxious late-night thoughts. And this, I think, is such an important lesson for all of us learning English, or, honestly, learning anything difficult. Mistakes with listening, especially mistakes related to catching emphasis and stress, are incredibly common, and they are absolutely fixable once you know what to listen for. Let's pause the story here for a second, because I want to give you a clear, practical breakdown of how emphasis usually works in English sentences. So when we continue with Lena's journey, you'll have the tools to understand exactly what's happening beneath the surface of the conversations. In most English sentences, the words that carry the core meaning, things like nouns, main verbs, adjectives, and negative words like not, never, or don't, these are usually the ones that get stressed. Meanwhile, smaller connecting words like the, a, is, to, and, these usually get said quickly and quietly, almost like they're just holding the sentence together in the background. Think of a sentence like a sentence full of bricks and connectors. The bricks are the important, heavy content, and the connectors are just the small pieces holding everything together. When you listen to English, your brain should naturally be drawn to the bricks, the stressed words, because that's where the real weight of meaning lives. If you focus equally on every single word, connectors and bricks alike, you'll end up mentally exhausted. And worse, you might actually miss the most important information, exactly like what happened to Lena. Let's bring another character into the story now, because Lena's growth throughout this experience becomes even clearer once we add someone else into the picture. A few weeks after the whole Friday and Monday mix-up, Lena was paired up with a new intern named Oliver, a young guy straight out of university, eager, a little overconfident, but genuinely kind-hearted. Priya asked Lena to help train him for his first 2 weeks, which honestly surprised Lena a little, since she still felt fairly new herself. But she quickly realized this was actually a great opportunity, because teaching Oliver forced her to become much more aware of how she spoke, and more importantly, how she listened. On Oliver's very first day, he sat next to Lena, notebook open, pen ready, looking slightly overwhelmed by everything happening around him. Lena remembered exactly how that felt, so she tried to make him comfortable. She told him, "Don't worry too much about writing every single word down. Just listen for the words that people push a little harder when they talk. Those are usually the important ones." Oliver looked a bit confused at first, the way most learners do the first time they hear this idea, so Lena decided to show him directly, using a real example instead of just explaining the theory. She waited until their afternoon team meeting, where Priya was giving updates about an upcoming client project. At one point, Priya said, "This client is extremely particular about design details, so please double-check everything before sending." Lena quietly leaned over to Oliver afterward and asked him, "Which words did you notice were stressed in that sentence?" Oliver thought for a moment and said, I think extremely and maybe everything?" Lena smiled and nodded, because he was already starting to catch it, even on his very first day. She explained that extremely was stressed because it showed the level of importance, almost like a warning, and everything was stressed because it emphasized that nothing should be skipped, not even small details. This small teaching moment meant a lot to Lena, because it reminded her how much she had grown since that nervous, coffee-shaking version of herself just a few weeks earlier. She realized that once you start noticing stress and emphasis in English, you can't really unnotice it. It becomes part of how your brain naturally processes spoken language. And that's exactly the shift I want to help create in you too. Through this video, through this story, and through the practice we're doing together right now. Let's do another practice moment together, because I really want this lesson to feel active, not passive. I want you to imagine you're sitting in that same meeting with Lena and Oliver. I'm going to say a sentence, and I want you to guess, before I tell you, which words would most likely carry emphasis if a native English speaker said this in a slightly serious or urgent tone. Here's the sentence. "I already told you twice not to email the client without checking with me first." Take a moment. Think about which words feel the heaviest, the most emotionally loaded in that sentence. If you guessed already, twice, and not, you're picking up on exactly the right pattern. Already and twice emphasize frustration and repetition, almost like the speaker is saying, "I've said this before. Why are we still having this conversation?" And not is crucial, because it's a negative word that completely changes the meaning of the instruction. If you miss the word not in a sentence like that, you might think the speaker is asking you to email the client, when actually they're asking you to avoid doing exactly that. This is why negative words in English are almost always stressed strongly, because missing them can lead to the complete opposite understanding of what was intended. Let's continue with Lena and Oliver's story, because there's a turning point coming that I think will really bring this whole lesson together in a powerful way. A few days after that meeting, Oliver made a small mistake. The kind of mistake that almost every intern makes at some point. He was supposed to send a draft document to a colleague for review, but he accidentally sent it directly to the client instead. A document that wasn't ready yet, still full of placeholder text and unfinished sections. As soon as he realized what happened, his face went pale, and he rushed over to Lena's desk, clearly panicking. Lena, remembering her own moment of panic with the Friday deadline situation, immediately felt a wave of empathy for him. Instead of getting upset or making him feel worse, she calmly said, "Okay, let's fix this together. First, we email the client right now, explain there was a mix-up, and send the correct version immediately." As they worked together to solve the problem, Lena gently pointed out something important. She said, "You know, Oliver, this is actually similar to what we talked about with listening for emphasis. When Priya explained the process for sending documents last week, she specifically stressed the word review and the word before. She said, everything goes through review before it reaches the client. If you focus on those stressed words, they tell you the whole process. Review first, client second." Oliver looked a little embarrassed, but he nodded, clearly absorbing the lesson. He admitted that he had been so focused on finishing tasks quickly that he hadn't really been listening carefully to the emphasis in Priya's instructions. This moment became a turning point for him too, not just Lena. From that day forward, Oliver started paying much closer attention, not just to what people said, but to how they said it. Which words carried extra weight? Which words were almost like invisible signals pointing toward what really mattered? I want to pause here again and give you another practical tool, because understanding the theory behind emphasis is helpful, but knowing exactly how to practice it yourself is even more valuable. One of the best ways to train your ear for stress and emphasis is something called shadowing. This means you listen to a short piece of spoken English, maybe just one sentence or a short paragraph, and then you try to repeat it out loud, copying not just the words, but the rhythm, the stress, the rise and fall of the speaker's voice. You're not just repeating words, you're repeating the music of the sentence, if that makes sense. Let's practice this together right now, using a sentence from Lena and Oliver's story. I'm going to say the sentence slowly, with clear emphasis, and I want you to repeat it after me, trying to copy exactly where the stress falls. Here's the sentence. Everything goes through review before it reaches the client. Notice how everything, review, and before carry more weight than words like goes, through, it, and the. Try saying it yourself now, out loud, pushing those three words just a little harder than the rest. Don't worry if it feels awkward at first. That awkward feeling is actually a really good sign, because it means you're stretching a muscle you haven't used very much before. As Lena and Oliver's working relationship grew stronger over the following weeks, something interesting happened. Oliver started noticing emphasis patterns not just at work, but in his daily life outside the office too. He mentioned to Lena one afternoon that he had been watching an English movie the night before, something he used to do just for entertainment, without really thinking about the language itself. But this time, he told her, he kept pausing the movie every few minutes, because he suddenly noticed how much meaning was hidden in the way characters emphasized certain words during arguments or during emotional scenes. He gave Lena an example from the movie. There was a scene where one character said to another, "I never said I didn't want to come." Oliver explained how confusing this sentence used to feel to him before, because there were two negative words close together, never and didn't, which made the meaning feel tangled. But once he focused on which word the actor emphasized most strongly, which happened to be never, the meaning became much clearer. The character was strongly denying ever saying such a thing, defending themselves with real emotional intensity. Lena smiled, genuinely proud of how far Oliver had come in just a few weeks, and honestly, a little proud of herself too, realizing how much she had grown since her own early struggles. This is such an important point I want to highlight for you directly. Emphasis in English isn't just useful for understanding work instructions or deadlines, although that's obviously valuable. It's also deeply connected to emotion, personality, and relationships between people. The same sentence, depending on which word gets stressed, can sound calm, angry, sarcastic, loving, or even threatening. This is part of why native speakers can express so much meaning with relatively simple vocabulary. They're not always choosing fancier words. They're choosing where to place emotional weight within the words they already have. Let's try another practice example together, this time focusing on how emphasis changes emotional meaning. Imagine someone says the sentence, "I thought you were coming with us." Now, if the speaker emphasizes the word thought, it might sound like they're expressing surprise or slight confusion, almost like, "Wait, I had a different understanding of the plan." But if instead they emphasize the word you, it might sound more personal, almost accusing, like, "I expected you specifically, not someone else, to come with us." And if they emphasize the word coming, it might highlight confusion about the action itself, like, "I thought the plan was that you were coming, not staying behind." Try saying that sentence 3 different ways right now, out loud. First, emphasize thought. Then, emphasize you. Then, emphasize coming. Notice how the emotional flavor of the sentence shifts each time, even though the words themselves never change. This is one of the most fascinating and useful aspects of spoken English, and it's something that written English simply can't fully capture, because on paper, all these words look exactly the same. Only your ear, trained through practice, can catch these subtle but powerful differences. Let's return to Lena's story once more, because there's an important event coming up that ties this whole lesson together in a really satisfying way. A big client presentation was scheduled, one of the most important projects the team had worked on all year. Priya asked Lena to help present part of the material directly to the client, a huge step up from her usual behind-the-scenes work. Lena felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness, similar to that very first day when she nervously held her untouched coffee at the office entrance. The night before the presentation, Marcus, her supportive co-worker and by now close friend, helped her rehearse. He told her something that connected beautifully to everything she had learned about emphasis over the past few weeks. He said, "You know, Lena, this isn't just about understanding emphasis when you're listening. It's also about using it yourself when you speak. If you want the client to remember the most important points, you need to stress those key words clearly, just like Priya does when she's giving instructions." This was a light bulb moment for Lena, because until then, she had mostly focused on listening skills, without fully realizing that emphasis works both ways, both for understanding others and for making sure others understand you. They practiced together for almost 2 hours that evening. Marcus would read parts of the presentation script, emphasizing certain words strongly, and then Lena would repeat the same lines, trying to match his rhythm and stress patterns. At one point, Marcus stopped her gently and said, "You're saying all the words with the same energy, like a flat line. Try pushing harder on increase, significant, and timeline, since those are the words the client really needs to remember." Lena tried again, and this time, her sentence came alive in a completely different way. The important information stood out clearly, almost like it was highlighted in yellow, even though she was only using her voice, not any visual tool. The next morning, presentation day arrived, and Lena walked into the meeting room with a steadiness she hadn't expected to feel. As she spoke to the client, she consciously placed emphasis on the key numbers, the important deadlines, and the core benefits of their proposal. She noticed the client leaning forward slightly during those stressed moments, nodding, clearly absorbing the important points. After the meeting ended, the client actually complimented her directly, saying her explanation was one of the clearest presentations they had received in a long time. Priya, standing nearby, gave Lena a small, proud smile, the kind of smile that says more than words ever could. Later that day, back at her desk, Lena reflected on everything that had happened since her very first week at this job. She thought about the Friday and Monday deadline confusion, the embarrassment she felt, the support she received from Marcus, the lessons she passed on to Oliver. And now, this successful presentation where her understanding of emphasis had directly helped her communicate more clearly and confidently. She realized that learning to listen for emphasis wasn't just a small technical skill. It had actually changed how she connected with people around her, how she understood instructions, how she avoided misunderstandings, and eventually, how she expressed herself with more clarity and confidence. I want to bring this story back to you now, because everything Lena experienced is something you can absolutely apply to your own English listening practice, starting today. The first step is simply becoming aware that emphasis exists and that it carries real meaning. Once you know to listen for it, your brain will naturally start picking up on these patterns more and more, almost automatically, the same way Lena's did over just a few weeks. The second step is active practice, things like shadowing, where you repeat sentences out loud, copying not just the words but the stress and rhythm. The third step, and this one is often overlooked, is paying attention to negative words specifically. Words like not, never, don't, won't, and shouldn't, because missing these small but powerful words can completely reverse the meaning of a sentence, exactly like what almost happened with Lena's report deadline. Let's do one more extended practice segment together before we wrap up, because I want you to leave this video feeling confident and ready to apply everything we've talked about. I'm going to give you a short imaginary conversation, similar to something Lena or Oliver might experience at their office, and I want you to think carefully about where the emphasis would naturally fall in each sentence. Here's the first line. Imagine a manager saying to an employee, "I need you to finish this today, not tomorrow." Think about which words carry the strongest emphasis. If you said today and not tomorrow, you're exactly right. The contrast between those two time words is the whole point of the sentence, and a native speaker would almost certainly stress them clearly to avoid any confusion. Here's the second line. Imagine a coworker saying, "She didn't say she was upset, she said she was disappointed." Think again about where the emphasis naturally falls. If you noticed upset and disappointed being stressed, along with a strong emphasis on the word didn't, you're picking up exactly the right pattern. This sentence is drawing a very specific contrast between two similar but different emotional words, and the speaker uses emphasis to make sure the listener understands that distinction clearly, rather than assuming the two words mean exactly the same thing. Here's a third line for you to consider, something a little more personal. Imagine a friend saying, "I really thought you would tell me first." Where would the emphasis likely fall here? If you guessed really and first, that's a strong, accurate answer. The word really adds emotional intensity, almost like disappointment or hurt feelings, and first emphasizes the expectation that this particular person should have been told before anyone else. Notice how, once again, understanding this emphasis completely changes how you interpret the emotional tone of the sentence, not just the factual meaning. Now, I want to give you a simple but powerful practice method you can start using immediately. Something you can do every single day, even if you only have 10 or 15 minutes available. Choose a short video, podcast episode, or audio clip in English. Something with clear, natural speech. Maybe even a scene from a show similar to what Oliver watched. Listen to just one sentence at a time, pause it, and try to identify out loud which word or words felt the most emphasized. Then, try repeating that sentence yourself, copying the emphasis as closely as you can. Do this with just 5 or 6 sentences a day, and within a few weeks, you'll likely notice, just like Lena and Oliver did, that your ear naturally starts catching these patterns without you even having to think about it consciously. I also want to mention something important about confidence, because I know language learning isn't just about technical skills, it's also deeply emotional. If you've ever felt frustrated, embarrassed, or discouraged because you missed something important in a conversation, please remember Lena's story. She was intelligent, hardworking, and had strong English skills overall. Yet she still missed a crucial detail simply because emphasis patterns weren't something she had been specifically trained to notice. This isn't a reflection of your intelligence or your overall English level. It's simply a specific skill, and like any skill, it improves significantly with focused, consistent practice. Let's think about Oliver's growth for a moment too, because his journey shows something equally important. He started as a nervous intern who barely noticed emphasis at all, and within just a few weeks, through consistent exposure and active practice, he was analyzing emotional nuance in movie dialogue on his own time, purely out of curiosity and genuine interest. This shows that once you start paying attention to this aspect of English, it often becomes something enjoyable, almost like solving a small puzzle every time you listen to someone speak. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by spoken English, you start feeling curious, engaged, and much more connected to the deeper meaning behind what people are saying. Now, I want to take you a little further into Lena's story because a few months after that successful client presentation, something happened that tested everything she had learned in a much bigger and more stressful way than anything before. The company decided to expand into a new market, and this meant working directly with an overseas partner team, people who spoke English as a second language too, just like Lena herself, but who came from a completely different background and had their own particular rhythm and accent when they spoke. Priya asked Lena to lead a weekly call with this partner team, mostly because of how well she had handled the client presentation earlier that year. Lena felt a familiar mixture of pride and nervousness settle into her chest, that same feeling from her very first week, except now she at least had some tools to work with. The partner team was led by a calm, thoughtful man named Julian, who spoke clearly, but with a noticeably different rhythm than Priya or Marcus. At first, Lena found herself struggling again, not because she didn't understand his vocabulary, but because his emphasis patterns felt slightly different from what she had trained her ear to expect. On their very first call, Julian said, "We can deliver the first batch by next week, but only if the specifications are finalized today." Lena caught the general meaning easily enough, but she almost missed the deeper urgency hidden in his emphasis on the word today, because his stress pattern was a little softer, a little less dramatic than what she had grown used to hearing from her own team. After the call ended, Lena sat quietly at her desk for a moment, feeling that familiar flicker of doubt creep back in. She wondered if maybe she had imagined her progress, if maybe this new challenge proved she hadn't really improved as much as she thought. But then she remembered something important, something that Marcus had told her months earlier during their late-night rehearsal session. He had said that emphasis isn't always identical from speaker to speaker. Different people, different accents, and different personal speaking styles can shift how strongly or subtly emphasis appears. The core idea stays the same. Important words get more weight than connecting words, but the exact strength of that weight can vary quite a bit depending on who's speaking. This realization actually helped Lena a great deal, because it meant she didn't need to expect every single person to sound exactly like Priya or Marcus. Instead, she needed to stay flexible, listening closely to each new speaker's individual pattern, almost like tuning into a slightly different radio frequency each time. On her next call with Julian, she consciously paid closer attention, not assuming the emphasis would sound loud or dramatic, but instead listening carefully for which words he seemed to slow down on, or which words he repeated for clarity. Sure enough, she began noticing his pattern more clearly. He tended to place emphasis through repetition rather than volume, often saying an important word twice in slightly different ways, almost like double-checking that the listener had caught it. For example, during their second call, Julian said, "This is important, really important, so please make sure your team reviews it carefully." Lena immediately recognized what was happening here. Even though his voice didn't rise dramatically in volume, The simple act of repeating the word important told her clearly that this point mattered a great deal. She made a note in her project tracker, flagged the item as high priority, and made sure to communicate that urgency clearly to her own team afterward. When Priya reviewed the notes later that week, she commented that Lena's summary of the partner call was some of the clearest, most accurate reporting she had received from any team lead handling that particular account. I want to pause here and give you another valuable practice tool, because this part of Lena's journey teaches something incredibly useful for real-world English listening. Not every English speaker emphasizes words in exactly the same way. Some speakers use volume and pitch dramatically, almost like Priya's direct clipped style. Others use repetition, like Julian. Some speakers slow down significantly on important words, almost stretching them out, while others might use a short pause right before an important word, letting silence itself create emphasis. The goal isn't to memorize one single fixed pattern, but rather to train your ear to stay alert and flexible, always asking yourself, what is this particular speaker doing right now to signal that something matters? Let's practice this flexibility together with a short exercise. I'm going to describe 3 different speaking styles, and I want you to imagine how the same sentence might sound in each case. The sentence is, "Please send the file before the meeting starts." First, imagine a direct, energetic speaker, someone like Priya, saying this with strong volume and a rise in pitch on the words before and starts. Say it out loud that way right now, pushing your voice up slightly on those words. Next, imagine a calmer speaker, someone like Julian, saying the same sentence but placing emphasis through repetition, perhaps saying, "Please send the file before the meeting starts," before it starts, not after. Notice how the repetition itself creates the emphasis, even without a dramatic change in volume. Finally, imagine a thoughtful, quieter speaker who uses a short pause for emphasis, saying, "Please send the file," before the meeting starts, with a small breath or pause right before the word before. Try saying all 3 versions out loud, one after another, and notice how your own voice naturally shifts to create each different style of emphasis. As the weeks went on, Lena's confidence with these international calls grew steadily, and she found herself genuinely enjoying the challenge of adapting to different voices and different emphasis styles. She even started sharing what she learned with Oliver during their regular check-ins, and interestingly, Oliver had been noticing similar patterns in his own listening practice outside of work. He mentioned that he had started listening to interviews with people from many different countries, all speaking English, and he found it fascinating how each person's personal rhythm shaped the way they highlighted important information, even though the underlying grammar rules of English stayed exactly the same for everyone. One afternoon, Oliver brought up something that led to a really meaningful conversation between him and Lena. He asked her, half joking but genuinely curious, "Do you think native speakers even realize they're doing this? Like, do they know they're stressing certain words on purpose?" Lena thought about it for a moment before answering. She said she believed most native speakers don't consciously think about it at all, the same way most people don't consciously think about which muscles they're using while walking. It just happens naturally, shaped by years and years of listening and speaking since early childhood. But for English learners, she explained. Becoming consciously aware of this pattern, at least at first, is incredibly valuable, because it builds a skill that eventually becomes just as automatic and natural as it is for native speakers. This conversation stuck with both of them, and it's something I want to stick with you too, as you continue practicing. In the beginning, noticing emphasis might feel like a deliberate, almost effortful exercise, similar to how learning to drive feels awkward and mentally exhausting at first, checking every mirror, thinking about every pedal. But just like driving eventually becomes automatic, listening for emphasis becomes automatic too, with enough consistent practice. You reach a point where you're not even trying anymore. Your brain simply catches the important words naturally, almost instantly, freeing up your mental energy to focus on the deeper meaning and emotional tone of what someone is saying. Let's bring the story to another important moment, because there's one more event I want to share with you before we wrap up today's lesson. Several months after Lena started leading the international partner calls, the company faced an unexpected and fairly stressful situation. A shipment mix-up caused a delay that threatened to affect a major client's launch date. Priya called an emergency meeting, and the tension in the room was noticeably higher than usual. During this meeting, Priya spoke quickly, her sentences shorter and sharper than her usual calm, measured tone. At one point, she said, "We cannot miss this deadline. We simply cannot." Everyone in the room understood the seriousness immediately, partly because of the words themselves, but largely because of how strongly Priya emphasized "cannot" both times, almost pressing down on the word with real intensity. Lena, sitting near the back of the room, felt her heart racing, not from confusion this time, but from genuine concern about the situation. However, unlike her very first week, she wasn't missing any part of the message. She caught every important detail: the urgency, the repeated emphasis, the underlying stress in Priya's voice signaling just how critical this moment truly was. After the meeting, Priya asked Lena, along with two other senior team members, to help coordinate directly with Julian's team to resolve the shipment issue as quickly as possible. During the emergency call with Julian, Lena noticed something interesting. Even under pressure, Julian's calm, repetition-based emphasis style stayed consistent. He said, "We will fix this. We will fix this today. I promise you." Even though his tone remained gentle compared to Priya's sharper urgency, the repeated phrase, "We will fix this," clearly signaled his seriousness and commitment. Lena relayed this information back to Priya with confidence, explaining not just what Julian said, but the level of urgency and commitment behind his words, based on how he emphasized them. Thanks to clear communication on both sides, the team managed to resolve the shipment issue within just a few hours, avoiding what could have been a much larger problem for the client relationship. Later that evening, as the office slowly emptied out and the tension finally eased, Priya stopped by Lena's desk. She said, quite sincerely, "You've become someone this team really relies on, especially when things get complicated. I've noticed how well you catch details during stressful conversations, even across different accents and speaking styles." Lena felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling completely different from that nervous, coffee-shaking anxiety she felt on her very first day. I share all of this with you because I want you to see the full arc of this transformation, Not just the technical lesson about stressed words and unstressed words, but the emotional and practical impact that skill can have over time. Lena went from missing a simple deadline because she couldn't catch emphasis clearly, all the way to becoming someone trusted during high-pressure, high-stakes situations, specifically because she developed the ability to listen closely and interpret meaning beyond just the individual words themselves. This is exactly the kind of growth that's available to you too, through consistent, intentional practice. Let's do one more focused practice segment before we move toward wrapping up, because I want to make sure you leave this lesson with plenty of real, usable practice under your belt. I'm going to give you 4 short sentences, similar to ones you might hear in a workplace, a friendship, or even a family conversation. And I want you to say each one out loud, trying to naturally emphasize the words that carry the most important meaning. Ready? Here's the first one. I can help you tomorrow, but not right now. Say it out loud, pushing emphasis onto tomorrow and not and now. Here's the second sentence. She specifically asked for the blue folder, not the red one. Try saying this out loud, emphasizing specifically, blue, and not, with a slightly lighter touch on red, since the contrast is really centered around blue being correct and red being incorrect. Here's the third sentence. I've called you 3 times already. Say this with emphasis on 3 times and already, letting your voice carry a little frustration or urgency, similar to how Priya spoke during that emergency meeting. And finally, here's the fourth sentence. We really appreciate everything you've done for this team. Try saying this one with warmth, emphasizing really and everything, letting your voice soften slightly, since this sentence carries gratitude rather than urgency or frustration. Notice how, across these 4 sentences, the emotional tone shifts significantly, from casual scheduling to correcting a mistake, to expressing frustration, to expressing genuine appreciation, and in each case, the specific words that carry emphasis directly shape how the listener interprets not just the factual meaning, but the emotional weight behind the sentence. This is the real power of understanding emphasis in English. It's not just a technical listening skill. It's a doorway into understanding the emotional layer of human communication, the layer that connects people to each other far beyond just exchanging information. Standing nervously at the office entrance, coffee in hand, about to hear the sentence that would eventually teach her, and now teach you, one of the most valuable listening skills in English. We need this report by Friday, not Monday. Such a simple sentence on the surface, yet it carried a lesson that touched every part of Lena's professional journey over the following weeks. Her relationship with Priya, her friendship with Marcus, her mentorship of Oliver, and eventually, her confidence during that major client presentation. I really hope this story helped the lesson feel real to you, rather than just abstract grammar rules floating on a page somewhere. Language, especially spoken language, is deeply human, full of emotion, personality, urgency, humor, and connection. Emphasis and stress are some of the tools that make all of that possible, and now that you understand how they work, I truly believe you're going to start noticing them everywhere. In movies, in podcasts, in conversations with friends, and in your own daily listening practice. Before we finish today, I want to leave you with one final practice challenge, something I'd love for you to actually try. not just think about. The next time you watch anything in English, whether it's a show, a video, or even a conversation between two people nearby, I want you to consciously listen for the stressed words in at least 3 sentences. Try saying those sentences out loud afterward, copying the emphasis as closely as you can. This tiny daily habit, repeated consistently, is exactly the kind of practice that helped Lena and Oliver grow so quickly. And I have no doubt it can do the same for you. If this lesson helped you understand something new about English listening, I would genuinely love it if you hit that like button, because it helps this channel reach more learners just like you, people who are working hard, sometimes struggling, but always moving forward, one small lesson at a time. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider joining the English in Fluency community here on the channel, because we release new listening lessons regularly, each one designed to help you understand real, natural spoken English, not just textbook examples. And if you have a moment, drop a comment below and tell me about a time when you misunderstood something in English because you missed the emphasis or stress in a sentence. I read every comment, and I love hearing your stories, because honestly, they help me create lessons that really speak to what you're experiencing. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. Learning a language is not always easy, and there will be moments, just like Lena experienced, where you feel embarrassed or unsure of yourself. But please remember, every single mistake, every missed word, every confusing conversation is actually pushing you forward, teaching your ear and your brain something new, even when it doesn't feel that way in the moment. Keep listening closely, keep practicing consistently, and I promise the progress will come, sometimes faster than you even expect. I'm Alex, and this has been English in Fluency. I'll see you in the next lesson, where we'll continue building your listening skills together, one real human conversation at a time. Take care of yourself, keep practicing, and I'll talk to you very soon.